Today, we're diving into one of the most iconic and controversial name changes in sports history, the Washington Commanders. For nearly 90 years, the team was known as the Washington Redskins, but in 2020, they rebranded themselves because Redskins was deemed too controversial. The irony lies in the fact that the new name, the Commanders, represent the very people who historically committed mass genocide against the Redskin warriors. Similarly to how the Commanders wiped out the Native Americans throughout history, it's happening again right in front of our eyes. Except this time it's being brought to light symbolically by one of the world's biggest sports franchises on the grandest stage. But it doesn't stop there. The team's nickname that many fans call them by is the Commies. For decades, the Commies has been used as a derogatory term to label communists and adds an entirely new twist to the already controversial rebranding story. In today's video, we're going to break down how a name that was meant to distance the team from controversy might have directly tied them to some of the most controversial ideas in history. Strap on your seatbelts because we're about to explore how one decision turned into a complete case study in utter irony. Let's get into it. We'll begin with the name. What do sports fans call the Commanders for short? The Commies. If you think that sounds familiar, you'd be right, because people have historically used that label as an abbreviation for calling people communists. The term commies has long been used as a derogatory slang term for communists. The irony here lies in the fact that the nickname intended to simplify the team's identity is unintentionally drawing a direct parallel to communist ideologies. Getting called a commie in the mid to late 1900s could literally get you thrown in jail, especially during the Cold War era. This juxtaposition leads to the mockery where a patriotic American football team based in the nation's capital inadvertently shares a nickname blatantly associated with communism. When they were rebranding the team and thinking of a new name, how did they not think of this? How do we go from the Redskins to the Commies? And it doesn't stop there. The Commanders' color scheme is nearly identical to those of the Communist Party. The color scheme of the Commanders is burgundy and gold, except they didn't use the same shade of burgundy and gold as the legendary Redskins did. The Commanders slightly altered their color scheme to look even more similar to the Communists. As you can see here, these are the helmets of the Commanders and the Redskins. Why the hell did the Commanders change their colors to go from the beautiful burgundy and gold to this version of red and yellow? Evidently, the Commanders' color scheme is practically matching the same exact colors used by the most prominent communist regimes. The similarities between the Commanders' helmet and the Soviet Union flag, China's flag, and Vietnam's flag have an unsettling resemblance. All three of these flags represent some of the most significant communist regimes in history. In a way, by adopting these colors, the team unwittingly mirrors the aesthetic of the very political movements they want to distance themselves from. Speaking of history, let's dive deeper into the historic role of commanders in American revolutionism. One of the darkest chapters in American history revolves around the government-sanctioned mass killings and genocide of Native Americans by the US military. A notable example is the Trail of Tears during the 1830s. This is when the president, aka the commander-in-chief, forcibly removed and displaced thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands in the United States. Furthermore, commanders from DC were directly responsible for ordering the massacre of thousands of indigenous people. For example, Lord Jeffrey Amherst used smallpox-infected blankets in an attempt to wipe out Redskin warrior Black Hawk. Another example is General George Armstrong Custer, a cavalry commander sent from DC who led an attack to forcibly remove and suppress indigenous peoples who resisted US expansion into their lands. Oh, and you can't forget about General Patrick Connor, a troop commander sent from DC who wiped out an entire Native encampment known as the Bear River Massacre. In an attempt to be politically correct by rebranding from the Redskins to the Commanders, they picked a name to symbolize the exact group of people who killed off and wiped out the Native Americans. The very name, Commanders, refers to the group of people who were directly involved in a brutal campaign to erase and genocide the Native American existence. By rebranding as the Commanders, they're essentially celebrating the very individuals who perpetuated mass murder of Native Americans, all while attempting to erase their own Redskins history. This is like a slap in the face to all Native Americans. The previous Washington name and logo was a nod to Native American heritage and culture. Now, not only are they silencing and erasing all of their representation in sports, but they're also doing it while glorifying their oppressors. What's worse is the attempt to censor history as a whole. Just take a look at this graphic here. Timmy Smith and John Riggins didn't play for the Commanders. They played for the Washington Redskins. Here's another example. When showcasing a Redskin quarterback highlight on TV, they literally photoshopped his jersey to erase the word Redskin on it. This is what his jersey is actually supposed to look like. Even just small petty attempts to censor and erase history like this are utterly pathetic. That's some extreme revisionist propaganda if I've ever seen it. Now let's talk about the person who gave them the Commanders name in the first place, Dan Snyder. When you think of a dictatorship, the first thing that comes to mind is someone who has absolute power, someone who holds all of the decision-making authority and often shows little to no regard for the will of others. Enter Dan Snyder, the former owner of the Washington Commanders, who personified many characteristics of an autocratic dictator during his tenure. Snyder's management style was incredibly autocratic and top-down. He clung to power despite scandals, corruption, and complete failure on the field. Sounds a lot like a certain Soviet communist leader who wouldn't step down no matter how bad things got. Snyder ran the Washington football team with an iron grip. He made almost every major decision, from player acquisitions to coaching hires, and didn't allow for much input from others. Much like communist leaders who concentrated power within a small circle, Snyder's leadership was marked by a top-down structure where opposition was stifled and decisions were made by one central ruling figure. When fans and employees criticized him, Snyder was known for dismissing their concerns and operating with a sense of entitlement over the franchise. This behavior mirrors the tactics used by many authoritarian leaders, ruling through fear, control, and a lack of accountability. Luckily, Snyder was eventually overthrown, but the name he gave the franchise, the Commanders, still exists, and the bad taste of Dan Snyder continues to linger in every fan's mouth.
Emotional damage.
Now let's talk about the Commanders fan base, or should I say comrades. The Commanders have two main catchphrases, #raise hail and left hand up. Ironically, both of them sound suspiciously like communist slogans. Think about it, raise hail sounds like it's straight out of some revolutionary propaganda manual. And then there's #left hand up. In most military salutes, you use your right hand, but the left hand, that's historically linked to socialist movements and communist salutes. The Commies fans are out here raising hail and throwing up left-handed salutes like they're gearing up for a red revolution. What's next? Are they gonna bring out a sickle and hammer logo at midfield? Raise hail, left hand up, go Commies! This brings me to my next point, how the team currently has no identity. In a capitalist society, branding is everything. Teams, companies, and even nations are known for their identities, logos, and rich cultural history. However, one of the most striking things about the Washington Commanders is their lack of identity after the name change from the Redskins. The team traded a name rich with history, culture, and tradition for one that feels sterile, generic, and disconnected from any real legacy. I mean, seriously, the Commanders is so generic it feels like AI generated it. The Redskins were a symbol of heritage, pride, and community. The Commanders feel like a bland, soulless corporate compromise to try and please a neutral audience of sheep. In the same way communism wipes out personal identity in favor of conformity, the Washington Commanders are a hollowed out franchise with no real connection to its past or present. In attempting to avoid controversy, they've created a team devoid of character and passion. Instead, it's an empty shell just to meet the demands of modern political correctness.
It's a pain in the butt being politically correct.
No spirit at all, just a lifeless moniker of a name chosen by the former dictator himself, Dan Snyder. The team changed their name from the Redskins because a select few deemed it offensive and they wanted to distance themselves from that history. So what did they do? They rebranded as the Commanders, a name that symbolizes military leaders from DC who wiped out the Native Americans. And if that wasn't bad enough, the nickname they landed with is the Commies, the same term used to describe some of the most oppressive communist regimes in world history. So let me get this straight. They thought that the old name was offensive, but rebranding themselves as the ones responsible for genocide and communism is perfectly fine. Instead of renaming the team to something less derogatory and one that honors Native American lineage, they go in the complete opposite direction. Only in this day and age could a football team try to be more politically correct and somehow end up with a name even more insulting and even more ironic.
Political correctness gone mad.
If you ask me, they should just go back to being called the Redskins. The Redskins embodies the warrior mentality of Native American spirit. They'll always be the Redskins to me, no matter what. A recent poll conducted shows that 9 out of 10 Native Americans are fine with the name. So a minority of a minority has to ruin it for all, and then they come up with the Commanders, which is a totally worse name. Bring back the Redskins, just do it. Or at least rename them to something that honors Native American imagery and puts them in a positive light. At least bring back the logo. The Redskins logo is one of the most beautiful and amazing logos in sports history. I mean, just look at it, it's awesome. Regardless, the current name, the Commies, the Communists, the Commanders, whatever, is ridiculous. If you want to get under the skin of a Commanders fan, just call them a commie. They can't actually get mad, right? It's the name they chose. Ya damn commies. Seemingly, the conversation about the Redskins name is more alive than ever. Watch this video next to learn why the Washington Redskins are making a comeback. The hype builds every day as the Redskins continue to make headlines as a potential revival is on the horizon. My name is Fish and I stay low key. Hail to the Redskins!
Hail to the Redskins!